Hey, it's Grady at Twin Creek Audio, back in the studio today. Today I have a mixing demonstration video for you that's a lot different, or at least somewhat different from what I've usually done on this channel. Today I'm going to be going for a more vintage sound in this mix, more vintage than the 70s even, kind of go all the way back to the 60s, and mix a spaghetti western style track. Now this track was created by Heath Rogers and myself for the Completist album Songs for Cats back in 2016, and it definitely is a tribute to the old spaghetti western soundtracks, but it's going to be really fun to do. The original version of this was mixed in the box, but I did go for a vintage sound on it. Of course, this version, or this particular song, being a tribute, but it does play up the surf rock connection that spaghetti western music kind of had, and we have more drums than what you would hear on one of those soundtrack songs. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, but we're going to mix it through the Soundcraft Sapphire, also in kind of a hybrid fashion, because I'm going to use the soft tube tape plug-in on all the tracks, because they would have had tape in the 60s when they recorded this kind of music. So I'm going to use soft tube tape on the B setting with the THD set at about 3.5, so that should be pretty cool. I'm going to run it through the Sapphire. I'm going to try and stick to only the low and high shelving bands of EQ, although back then I have a feeling that the frequency point on the high shelf wouldn't have been 12K, so I may have to cheat and use some high mid EQ. I'm not sure. I'm also going to do a really cool trick. I'm going to use the NUX Atlantic Reverb for pre-delay on a plate reverb sound in the Yamaha Rev500. I'll show you how that works and go all through this mix, and of course after we go through the mix together here, I'll print the final mix and then I'll go into maybe a little more detail afterwards like I normally do in these videos. So let me go ahead and set up the camera over here and get started on this mix. So let's look at how I set up this pre-delay and reverb. First of all, I came from auxiliary 4 here on my Patchbay through this cable, and that comes over here to the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb pedal. It goes to the input of the pedal back here. And of course I have this set completely wet, so you're only getting the repeat and not the dry signal, and I just set the delay time right there, and that's on. Then the output from this goes back over to the Patchbay, and it goes down here into the left side mono input of the Yamaha Rev500. Then the stereo outs from the Rev500 go back into the stereo channel there on the console. So that's how we're getting tape pre-delay into the Yamaha Rev500 reverb. And this is the NUX Atlantic delay and reverb. I'm using the 60s style delay setting with this exact setup all the way wet, so we're only getting the repeat signal through this, and then that's going over to the reverb. Since I have the NUX Atlantic tape delay feeding this reverb, the pre-delay on here is turned off, and our delay time is set to 2 seconds. I'm using the Vocal Plate 2 preset here on the Rev500 for our plate reverb sound. Okay, for our Western song here, we've got kick drum, snare drum, stereo toms, and then the overhead was actually a mono ribbon mic, which is pretty good for the sound we were going for. So it's a mono overhead, and I did have a hi-hat mic. I don't really have much of the hi-hat going through here, but I've sent that out as a stereo pair, even though this is just really a mono room mic, just so that if I wanted to add some hi-hat, I could add it to the right side probably, since I'm trying to mix this at audience perspective this time. And a lot of it's going to be fairly mono, but I did think the acoustic guitar that drives the whole song, it was 2 mic setup, so it sounded better panned out a little bit. And then we've got bass here, bass guitar. Of course, there's nothing here because all of our other stuff is down here. And what this is a shaker, and then we have a whip crack sound, and we've got 2 channels over here that are hums, a hum melody, and then we have O's, oh, 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 over here. So all of our featured sounds and vocals are down here with all of our instruments here. So we don't have a lot of stuff. It's not really complicated, and that's good for this style. I mean, obviously we would have had a lot more sound effects on an actual movie soundtrack, but being that this is just a tribute and I'm trying to keep it simple, this is good. So let's give a listen to it right now. There is no EQ engaged on the board. In fact, I've even zeroed all of these so you can visually see theirs. I don't have any EQ going to anything. There are no compressors or anything inserted here at all. I do have aux4 going over to the NUX delay and reverb pedal that's set to the 60s style tape delay, and then that's feeding into a plate reverb, which is coming back here. Now the outputs of that reverb unit are in stereo, so this is a stereo mix, but I'm not going to, really make it dramatically wider or try to do anything much to it. We're just going to try and, maybe get a little bit of stereo spread out of these toms, because we are going for something that's a tribute, but it's a little more modern. I'm ready to hear this now. Let's see what's going on. So that's kind of what we're dealing with the tape plugins and everything just coming through the console, and that reverb setup that I devised. It already sounds pretty cool. Let's see what we might need to change on this. Do I have too many things going to the reverb? I think the main guitar melody needs to go to that reverb with that 60s tape delay or pre-delay, and as well as the acoustic. I don't have as much of the acoustic guitars going there. I have the drum room mic down here, which is something I skipped a minute ago. There is a room mic on the drum kit right here. I'm actually relying really heavily on that room mic to get a lot of the drum sound, and these other close mics are just filling in, and this is where we're getting a more modern sound, is out of these close mics, while our mono overhead and our room mic are, really they're carrying a lot of the drum sound for this mix. Let's hear just the drums by themselves. Yeah, the drums sound good. That's the kind of vibe that I'm going for. It's very natural sounding and very roomy sounding, even though I do have some close mics on there to give us a little bit more punch and a little more presence out of the drums. But overall, we've got a lot of the room sound and the overhead mic, and it kind of just sounds right for the track. I really like that. Of course, we do have the tape plug-in in the box that's doing a little bit to the sounds. That's probably compressing the drums a little bit, but it sounds pretty close to authentic, but a little bit more modern. It sounds like what I want to hear on this mix. Let's hear the room mic by itself. The room mic sounds good. You can probably tell that's where the majority of this drum sound is coming from, that room mic, but a little bit from the overheads as well. So let's hear the overhead mic and the room mic together. So you add in the overhead mic and you get a little bit more brightness, and you definitely get a little bit more snare drum. Now I don't have the room mic going to the reverb, or the tape delay feeding the reverb rather, but I do have the overhead mic going to that. Just a small amount of the overhead mics are going to that 60s tape pre-delay and then into the reverb. Now I'm going to add in the kick and the snare mic. So we're hearing kick, snare, overhead mic, and room mic. only major difference when you add in the close mics on the kick and the snare is that you get more kick drum and you get a little bit more attack on the kick drum, but I'm not sculpting that kick drum. I'm not pulling out any mids. I'm not trying to make it more punchy. I want it to have a vintage sound and sit down in the mix nicely and let all these other instruments and sound effects and things kind of ride on top of that. And to me, it sounds really good. Now, I don't like not being able to hear the kick drum at all, so we do have the close mic, and without any EQ at all, so far we've got a really nice balance on the drums. Now I'm going to bring up just the bass guitar by itself so we can hear what that sounds like. And this is an electric bass. I believe this is a PV Foundation bass guitar. The bass sounds pretty good. That is something they probably would have had some compression on the drums. My guess is they would have fed all the drums through a single compressor in mono possibly. They probably would have compressed a bass guitar in the 60s too. So I may actually add some compression to the bass. I don't think I'm going to do much to the drums though. They're sitting in the mix nicely, and the tape plug-in seems to have added as much compression as they really need. We don't really want to start slamming these things with compression and making them much louder in the mix than they are, because we're going to lose kind of the natural balance that we're going for with this thing. So let's see about putting some compression on the bass guitar. I think I've got an outboard rack patched in. Let's see, where's our bass? Bass is here on 8. So we can go insert send on 8 to insert return. So I've patched in the Urei LA-10 compressor on the bass guitar. I want to hear what that sounds like. I'm trying to set the LA-10 up as if it's an optical compressor, which it's not. It's a VCA compressor, but I don't have an optical compressor here in the studio at the moment. So we're just going to roll the settings around a little bit, probably go with a nice slow attack, a pretty slow release, and the detector circuit more to average instead of peak, so that we're not really compressing with too hard of a knee. Let's hear that. So we've got pretty good, solid, strong bass guitar sound with the LA-10 on it. It added a little bit of noise, but that's okay. We've got a vintage sound kind of going anyway. Let's hear the whole mix so far. Let's listen to this acoustic guitar. I think it sounds really cool. It actually sounds like a smaller guitar than it is. I'm pretty sure this was a dreadnought sized acoustic guitar, but it just has kind of an unusual sound that really fits this song. I'm not going to even try to sweeten it. It sounds a little bit boxy, but that's cool for what we're doing here, and so let's hear that. So again, that's not the most sparkly, pretty acoustic sound in the world, but I think for the vibe that we want out of this song, it's absolutely perfect. I'm not really going to do anything to that. It is 2 mics and they're panned in stereo, but it has a pretty cohesive sound right in the center anyway, with just a little bit of spread, and that's good. And there is a little bit of reverb going to that 60s tape delay and then to the plate reverb. I'm going to do a little bit of acoustic guitar EQ here. I'm going to turn on just the high shelf EQ and I'm going to add some highs to that acoustic and see if that works for me or whether I actually need to cheat a little bit and use a high mid-frequency EQ on this. So I figured I might have to do that. I had to actually cheat a little bit. Instead of just using high and low shelf EQ, I had to use a little bit of high mid-frequency EQ on those acoustic guitars to get them to cut through the mix nicely. But I didn't sparkle them up too much. In fact, I found that the high frequency shelf here on the Sapphire was actually just bringing a lot of string noise and things that I didn't like. So I turned that back down a little bit. And I'm boosting more of an upper mid-range kind of frequency, and I also decided to go ahead and high pass those. All things that they would have been able to do in the 60s, and again, we're not trying to emulate that exactly, we're just going for that general vibe and something more modern, and it's a tribute to the spaghetti western style soundtrack music. It's not supposed to be an exact recreation because I don't have anything here to do that really authentically. Now I'm going to work with the tremolo lead guitar part a little bit and see what it sounds like by itself. Again, this is already sounding pretty good in the mix, but I tend to solo these things up for the video so you can hear the individual elements. So here is the main guitar melody, which has a tremolo on it, which is probably just a pedal that he used. And we're feeding it again to the 60s style tape delay, which is being used as a pre-delay to a plate reverb. That guitar sounds really cool. I really love the 60s style tape pre-delay with the plate reverb on that, but the original thing being tracked with that tremolo, that also sounds really cool. I don't need to do anything to that. That was already sitting in there really nicely. Just wanted you to hear what that sounded like on its own because it sounds really cool. I really like that. Now everything else is down on this end of the board. We've got a couple of sound effects and then our hums and our oohs down here. So that's really all that's left. Let's go ahead and solo up these two sound effects and hear those real quick, because that's going to have the tape pre-delay and the plate reverb on it too. I'm only using the one reverb, that's it. You know, I don't know if they wouldn't have had anything back in the 60s except for a plate and maybe some chambers or something like that. So we're just using tape pre-delay and a plate reverb sound. There's our shaker, classic. I love that. Here's some bleed from the acoustic guitar, which is also cool. We're gonna have a whip sound here in just a second. That just sounds awesome. The shaker's awesome. The reverb on it with that tape pre-delay, it just sounds perfect. I really am happy with that. That is so cool. Now I'm going to play you the hums. This is the hummed melody line that basically it just follows that awesome tremolo guitar part. That sounds really cool with that tape pre-delay and the plate reverb on it, but let's take it out for a second and hear those hums without it. It's a double track, so it still sounds pretty cool. It sounds like, several people humming together, which is great. I do think that tape pre-delay and that plate reverb add so much to that and give it just the right sound for this, just like everything else is. Everything's sounding really good through that tape pre-delay with the reverb, the plate reverb. Just sounds wonderful. I'm going to move on to the other vocal performances, which are oohs in this case, and they kind of overlap and double the hums towards the middle of the song. And without the reverb. Yeah, that sounds good by itself, but I love that reverb on it. I'm just going to work with it a little bit more before I get ready to print the final version of this mix. Ended up having to balance a few more things, as well as I added my Symetrix 501 compressor to the kick drum because I really felt like it was getting lost in the mix, and I don't want it to be so vintage that you can't hear the kick drum. So I ran that through the 501 with some pretty conservative settings, again trying to set it with kind of a slower attack and a slower release like a more vintage sounding compressor would have. It really didn't do a lot otherwise. I used the high and the low shelving EQ just to boost the signal a little bit, since I boosted them the same. It probably didn't change the sound. I don't know, it just sounded right. I think that sounded pretty good, so I think I'm pretty close to ready to print this final mix. So I ended up taking the high shelving EQ off of the kick drum and actually pulling it back in the mix a little bit. But again, the only compression I have on anything in this mix is the kick drum and the bass guitar. So everything else is just the sound of the console and of course that wonderful reverb setup that I devised for this mix. So I think I'm ready to print the mix finally. So let's get started with that and print a final mix of this song. Since I have the NUX Atlantic tape delay feeding this reverb, the pre-delay on here is turned off. And our delay time is set to 2 seconds. I'm using the Vocal Plate 2 preset here on the Rev500 for our plate reverb sound. This is the Urei LA-10 compressor. Using this on bass guitar, as you can see, I have this detector circuit set almost all the way over here to average, so it's going to have a soft knee type compression. Then the attack is set relatively slow, as is the release. The ratio is set to 3:1. So that's for bass guitar. On the kick drum, I didn't really want to smash the kick drum. I just wanted to mainly boost the level and add a little bit of compression. So I set these right in the center. And this isn't really getting that much compression over here, maybe 3 dB of compression on the kick drum. And that's it for the outboard gear. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you'll check out the original version of that song from the Completest Songs for Cats album, as well as checking out all the other links in the video description for music that I've produced or been a part of. All those links do go to help support this channel. So I hope that you'll check those out, as well as liking this video and subscribing to the Twin Creek Audio YouTube channel. Share my videos with your friends and all that good stuff. Definitely appreciate you watching. Hope that you all have an excellent or wonderful day, night, evening, hour, minute, second, weekend, nanosecond, whatever it is you're having. Have a good one. And thanks so much for watching.